How we doing there, boys and girls? Manthieus here, and welcome to the next little video in our series covering the professions here on the Dragonflight Alpha. Now, we've taken a little bit of a look at a couple of the professions already. I spent a few hours playing with Inscription yesterday. Inscription came out in the most recent update to the Alpha. I leveled it all up, I had a little play through the spec trees, and I thought I'd give you guys a bit of an overview of what's going on with it today. It's sticking relatively true to what we know and love about Inscription. They're not sort of trying to reinvent the wheel too much. We get in the usual bits and pieces through the profession. But before we dive too deep into the actual patterns itself, I suppose the first thing that most people have questions about when it comes to Inscription is milling. Milling is a big fundamental part of Inscription. Taking those herbs, turning them into pigments, and then converting them into inks. This is, you know, the bread and butter of the profession, and this is often where a lot of people try and focus and do some maths and work out the best milling rates and this sorts of stuff. For the purpose of this video, I'm not going to go into it in too much detail, simply because it feels real jank and real broken on the alpha right now. The elephant in the room is that there is no mass milling button. You are milling 5 herbs at a time, where we've in previous expansions kind of got used to milling 20 at a time. Hopefully this will be rectified by increasing crafting speed and multi-craft procs and the likes. So we'll see how that plays out. But it does kind of feel a little bit awkward milling only 5 herbs at a time, especially with how it is currently in regards to the quantity of herbs that go into pigments that then go into inks. The conversion ratio feels really weird. You have to dump so many herbs just to make a single ink. It feels like it needs a little bit of an overhaul with the balancing. But of course, this is what alpha and betas are for. It's to find out where things feel a bit jank and to fix them. Materials wise though, let's take a look at the materials. There's only 4 herbs that you really seem to care about. The Wrythebark, the Bubble Poppy, the Saxifrage, and the Hockenbloom. These are the 4 new herbs. These, when milled down, give a variety of different pigments. I've tried to lay it out to sort of replicate this a little bit. Your Wrythebark is going to give you the Awakened Earth essences and then Flourished pigments. You will also gain Shimmering pigments. I should explain, Shimmering pigments is your generic pigment. You are going to get this regardless to what you're milling. And from testing, you always have way too much of it. This is another indication of where some balance might need to happen. You always have way too much of this one pigment. But shimmering pigment comes from everything. Bubble Poppy is going to mill into Awakened Frost and gives you Serene pigment. Serene pigment, of which then converts into Serene ink. Your Flourishing pigment converts into Flourishing ink. You have Saxifrage. Get used to this. Learn this name. You're going to need a lot of it. I'll explain why in a minute. That gets milled into Awakened Fire and gives you the Blazing pigment, which in turn converts into your Blazing ink. Now, all 3 of these, like I said, all 3 of these give these unique pigments, and they convert into the Shimmering pigment. This is where Hockenbloom is slightly different. Hockenbloom does not appear at the moment to have its own unique pigment color. It purely converts down into the shimmering pigment. And on the basis that you always have too much shimmering pigment anyway, I would not suggest anybody be using Hockenbloom for the purpose of milling unless you're really trying to hunt down Awakened Airs, or some smart person finds a way to dump a bunch of this and maybe get a shuffle on the go or something along those lines. But that's the basics of the milling. We have the 3 inks then, the Blazing ink, the Serene ink, and the Flourishing ink. You get to learn and make these relatively quickly on. They just take some water. This is relatively usual to us by this point. Take some water, a combination of the Serene pigments, or the ink specific pigment, we should say, and a small amount of the shimmering pigment. Considering you get shimmering pigment for anything that you're milling, it feels like these 2 numbers should probably be the other way around. It feels like you should probably use 10 of the generic pigment and 5 of the specific pigment. Consider it like, you know, this is your base color, and then this is your coloration, maybe, I don't know. And of course, vials. Vials play their same part as they always have done. There's 2 more inks though. We're not limited to just 3 in Dragonflight by the looks of things. We're going to be making burnished inks, which is very simply just a combination of 1 of each of the inks mushed together. If I know anything about colours, if you put 3 different colours together, you're likely going to come out with brown. But sure, burnished ink is a thing. And then later on down the lines, you're going to unlock the ability to make cosmic ink, which is a similar process. Again, you take the burnished ink you've just created and you throw a couple more reagents at it to make a slightly more sophisticated ink. This is more often what goes into your end game crafts, your trinkets. There's a couple of staves that scribes are going to make this time round. So one ink goes into the other, It's a little bit of a tiered system. And then, of course, there's some of the generic materials that by this point you've probably seen in a few people's profession guides. The Artisan's Metal, which is going to be a somewhat limited material, but goes to limit the amount of certain items that you can craft, kind of holding you back from fully industrializing the professions. There's one topic where this is key. We'll talk about this in a minute. And then the Spark of Ingenuity and the Primal Chaos. These are 2 bind-on pickup materials, which your raiders, your mythic pluses, your PvPers are likely to get their hands on a small amount, and will likely put these forward to the work orders when buying bits of gear off you. But what are we crafting then? That's a little overview of the materials. What are we actually crafting with Inscription? Well, it keeps pretty true to what you would expect it to have. We have missives making a return. Missives are a big part of crafting in Dragonflight. They've kept it relatively similar to what we always know and love with missives, although this time, instead of applying the 2 missives, each which have their own separate secondary stat, they're now using these sort of tags to the missives to give combinations. So one missive will make critical strike and haste, one missive will make verse mastery, one missive will use verse and crit. It will be up to you to pick the right one that has the combination of stats on it. But these are all bind on pickup. These can all be crafted and thrown up on the auction house. So a good little consistent little money maker with the missives, I would imagine to be a thing. In Shadowlands, missives were very much just a legendary thing, but they're going to play a bit more of a part, I feel, in Dragonflight, as nearly every piece of endgame crafted gear can utilise missives to specify those secondary stats where needed. We have Darkmoon deck boxes. The Darkmoon deck system, I think I need to do a whole video on it by itself, because it does have some significant changes this time. You first have to craft the Darkmoon decks. The Darkmoon deck trinkets are bind on equip like we know and love them from previous expansions. You're going to be able to craft these and throw them up on the auction house. There's a problem though, that you're not going to be able to mass produce cards like you once were. I suppose at this point I can give you a bit of an overview of the Darkmoon cards. You start off by making Darkmoon booster packs. This is a pattern that's actually unlocked via the specialization trees. We'll talk about those a little bit more in a minute. The Darkmoon booster packs, once you've unlocked them through the spec trees, are, interestingly, not directly using any herbs or any inks. They are only using the awakened earth, air, fire and frost that you're going to acquire from milling herbs. Presumably, there will be other ways in the game to get these, because these components are relatively generic across most of the professions at this point. But the big ticket one is these Artisan's Metal. It was made very clear by Blizzard that these things are going to be limited in their quantity. You're probably going to have to do something specific to get them as a crafter. And as you can see, making a single booster pack is going to take 5 of these things. Meaning that there's going to be some element of time gating, presumably, to just how frequently a scribe can make a booster pack. What's in a booster pack, you ask, though? Well, in a booster pack, it usually contains 2. Through benefits in the specialization trees, is likely to produce more cards once you spec further into Darkmoon deck crafting. But they start off by giving you 2, sometimes 3 cards, and it's a very similar system as we've seen before. Ace through till 8 for the basic cards, which when combined make into the regular decks themselves. Like I said, there's a good chance I'll do a dedicated little video on the Darkmoon decks themselves. Blizzard themselves have asked for some direct feedback on it, so I will do that for them. But Darkmoon Decks is going to be a similar thing, apart from it's probably not going to be that first few day rush like it usually is. You're going to be able to craft a few of them here and there. We've already heard people consider the options of just, setting up just alt armies of scribes to be able to focus on crafting these. But I think they're going to probably try and take a different approach with the Darkmoon cards this time around. What are these Darkmoon deck boxes, though? Well, the boxes are actually the end game trinkets that the players are actually going to want. The Darkmoon deck trinket itself, item level 350 sounds reasonable, but compared to most other pieces of end game crafted gear, it is a step behind in strength. 393 feels to be the default item level for your average run-of-the-mill endgame stuff, of which that can then be improved in quality and infused to increase the item level at a later date if needed. Interestingly, you can also add these Darkmoon Sigils this time round. The Darkmoon Sigils are going to be a way to customize the way the trinket works. The Darkmoon deck trinkets, for reference, tend to shuffle the cards, and based upon the number of the card, they do more or less damage. What you're able to do with these sigils is to adjust the way the shuffling is done. So it stops shuffling, for example, when the ace is drawn. There are other ones that the deck will shuffle faster. For those min-maxes out there that wait for the perfect opportunity to use their Darkmoon trinket, because of course most of the abilities are on-use abilities, for people that are waiting for the absolute optimal time to do it, going out of your way to attach a Darkmoon sigil to your deck box will customize the way the deck works, and it's we'll see how this plays out. They are planning for this to be, you have to fully specialize into even making these, so they're putting quite a few hurdles in front of you to be even able to make these. So let's hope that they significantly change the play style enough so that people even want to bother. But there's Darkmoon cards. There's a brief little overview of Darkmoon cards. Of course, the main 350 item level trinkets are bind on equip. Sell those on the auction house as you wish. And the last thing I should probably state with the Darkmoon deck cards, bearing in mind that we know that the booster packs are going to be slightly limited through scribes themselves, is they're going back to the old classic way. The regular cards are going to drop out in the world. Meaning that, your random Joe has a chance of finding a 5 of Earth out when doing his world quests and can throw that up on the auction house. So there'll be a passive supply of these things from the entire player base, very much like how Darkmoon decks used to work many years back. Not totally requiring on those scribes to busy away to make those in the first few days. But there's Darkmoon cards. What else are scribes making then? Scribes, we've talked a little bit about missives. We've talked about the Darkmoon deck cards. Weapons, scribes are going to produce a few pieces of endgame weapons. There's an offhand. There's a couple of pillars that are going to be able to be produced. Similar fashion, these are all bind on pickup. These are going to have to be purchased through the work order system. I've done a little video. I did a little video yesterday talking about the work order system, so check that out if you want to see the first implementation of how that may pan out. But the reality is that somebody who wants one of these is going to place an order for one, and assuming that you have the expertise in the profession to fulfill it, you can craft that order. The trade takes place, and everybody's a winner. So there's a couple of items we're going to be making here. A couple of basic ones, a couple of slightly lower item level bind on equip ones for your regular crafting and stocking on the auction house. We have those runes and sigils that I mentioned previously regarding the Darkmoon decks. These actually look remarkably costly. Not only do you have to spec into them specifically, so there's going to be a time gating aspect to even unlocking these, you have to denote quite a lot of resources to making one of these. So I really do hope that the actual benefit of adding these outweighs all of the difficulty of unlocking and crafting them, and the expense as well. 20 artisans metals could in turn actually make you you know, 8 to 10 Darkmoon cards in and of itself. So the value of one of these is, you know, the usefulness is going to have to outweigh its initial cost. We'll see how that pans out when things are balanced a little bit further. Profession equipment. Scribes are making profession equipment like everybody else. You tend to make 1 or 2 pieces of profession equipment for yourself, and then there's a bunch for the other professions that you may want to share out. You know, you can sell some stuff to alchemists. You can sell some stuff to anybody cooking, for example. There's the return of fortune cards. These are just probably going to be a way to burn through some spare inks. Now, unfortunately, there isn't an ink that specifically requires only shimmering pigment, so there's no real way to just burn through these specifically. And because you can laser focus each of the blazing ink, the serene ink, and the flourishing ink, due to the fact you can laser focus which ones you want by milling the right herb, you're unlikely to have spare ones. So we're gonna have to see just how much gold can be created through these, and whether it's going to be worth flipping these fortune cards in the first place. Probably not an early expansion feature, but this will probably kick into play when all the herbs and all the inks and everything gets much, much cheaper later on down the lines. What I've done is I've unlocked everything that's possible to unlock through leveling the profession and through the specializations. Now we can take a look at the items that are unlearned. Every single item from this point on is going to be something that you're going to have to go out into the world to actually acquire. You do not unlock it through the spec trees, and you do not unlock it through just natural leveling of the profession. So we have some illusions. These are just appear to be very simple things to change the appearance. You can, you know, cast a burst illusion at another player. Little fun little toy to play with. A scroll of sales. This looks like quite an interesting item. We're not quite sure exactly how we're going to get the pattern for this yet, but it's going to summon a vendor for general goods. Supplies will vary based on the quality of the scroll, and there is a 6 hour cooldown on this. It's going to be interesting to find out exactly what these actually end up selling. If they're going to be, you know, general goods, what does that mean? What's going to actually be part of that? Will people want to have one of these in their bags by default? Of course, everybody nowadays runs around with the yak mount and the mammoth mount, so that there's and even the long boy, so that there's vendors on demand when needed. But this could be another alternative option. Contracts are making an appearance again. Contracts for each of the different professions. Presumably, once you gain a certain standing with each of the factions, you'll unlock the contract to be able to then craft it and sell those on. Works in the same sort of way. Bonus reputation every time you complete a world quest for that specific faction. These, once again, another component that is using artisan's metal. So there is going to be some choice to where you choose to spend these. Are you going to spend them on Darkmoon cards? Are you going to spend them on crafting contracts? So you know, there's a few places you could choose where to spend these. And then two final things, I suppose. There's glyphs, which are not glyphs anymore. A staple of the inscription profession since day one, unfortunately, is not making an appearance in its natural form. But Dragonriding, appearance changing, customization stuff is all done through Inscription by the looks of things. So instead of changing, in most cases, the appearance and customizing yourself with glyphs, you're going to be able to customize your dragon. There's a few dragons that we're going to be collecting by the looks of things, and then there's going to be some appearance changes to those also. These look to be interesting. We'll see how these actually play out once we can actually craft some of these and play around with the Dragonriding customization in a little bit more detail. And then finally, I've left a good one for last. Finally, I want to talk just very quickly about these Draconic treaties on blacksmithing, Draconic treaties on herbalism. You know, a Draconic treaties on something, on a profession. What these are going to do, these are going to provide the scribes the ability to craft knowledge books, books of knowledge that are going to then allow people with said professions to increase their knowledge by using this book. This concerns me greatly, because if you can purchase these through the work order system, There's the likelihood that somebody's going to be able to just put a nice healthy tip, get their order filled very quickly, and potentially get multiple orders filled by multiple different scribes. Scribes could end up funneling huge amounts of knowledge to other professions, giving some people a significantly unfair advantage. They're really going to have to be careful with how they implement this, because as soon as you can start buying knowledge points, the specialization system falls apart very quickly. But let's talk about specs then. We can't test this too thoroughly on the alpha at the moment, so time will tell just how this actually plays out. But the spec trees are reasonable for Inscription. I do still feel they need a little bit of love. Rune Mastery, for reference, is basically your generic Inscription. This is the spec tree that you're going to take if you just want to be better at this stuff, the converting your herbs into pigments and your pigments into inks. This is an efficiency side of the tree. This is your efficiency spec. Everything here is going some way to improving the efficiency of your milling and your ink creation. Now, of course, there comes a point where a scribe may just, end up buying all the inks, and so to easily ignore this, put it in the hands of somebody else. But to start with, this will probably be quite a powerful tree to focus on, as you can improve the crafting, multi-craft when making inks, inspiration when crafting inks, more multi-craft, and also increasing the speed in which you're able to make them. So this is your efficiency tree. We then have archiving. Archiving is where you're going to choose to focus in one direction or another. This is very much a Darkmoon tree, believe it or not. You go to one direction, and this is where you are going to unlock the Darkmoon booster packs so that you can start making cards yourselves. You can then choose to specialize into each different variation of the card, improving your chance of creating more cards, improving the there's actually a couple of things that are not implemented for testing at the moment. When you specialize more into a card, you're going to give yourself a greater chance of finding those cards when opening the booster packs. So if it results in there being one deck that's significantly stronger than the others or in greater demand, you may choose to specialize yourself in making that one to just aid your production of those cards overall. The other side of the tree is all the sigils stuff. The sigils that's then going to help boost or adjust the effect and the way that your Darkmoon card works. In theory, they are looking to take Darkmoon cards out of just being a first patch trinket that everybody loves and then dumps. They're going to try and make the Darkmoon trinket something that may stay with you a little bit longer by the looks of things, with the ability to upgrade its item level and adjust these sigils. You can choose to spec into this as well. And the southern part of this tree, the southern part of the archiving tree, is if you want to become better at crafting your missives, more constructive at crafting the missives, saving yourself resources when crafting them more efficiently. And the other side is the treaties that we mentioned previously. The final tree is your rune binding tree. Rune binding tree here is kind of the odds and ends. This is what we've seen in a few of the professions now, where Blizzard kind of, they've the logical spec trees have been done, and then they just feel the need to make another spec tree for the sake of making a spec tree. And this is just what I would commonly refer to as your odds and sods, your bits and pieces, how to improve at making the profession tools, how to improve at making the couple of weapons, how to improve making codexes and Vantus runes and such. The other little bits and pieces that you may want to dabble with, but are not really going to be the main focus of the profession. So the spec trees seem simple to begin with. I started with 1,000 knowledge points on this character. I've maxed everything out, and I'm still left with 320 knowledge points. So those good at maths will realize that there's what's that, like 680 knowledge that's needed to max out the profession currently, which is roughly on par with what we've seen with some of the other professions. So there we go. That's pretty much Inscription in a nutshell. If you've got any questions, queries, please feel free to ask in the comment section down below. We can't, like I said, for Things like milling rates, I would love to go into detail and get really geeky with maths. We'll have to save that for once things have been balanced out a little bit more. But Inscription is looking good. It's looking good. I'm hoping that the Darkmoon trinkets, even though they're changing the way that they're going to be implemented, still look to be remarkably powerful, and I think it could be a good little goal maker of a profession if that's your jam. But I'll leave it there for today, boys and girls. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy these kinds of videos, please remember to hit the like button, subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll catch you all next time. Peace.